Good afternoon and welcome to this community workshop on climate adaptation. As you all know, the new and more ambitious EU Adaptation Strategy has been adopted and released on Wednesday this week, 2 days ago. And the purpose of this event that we organized to attract attention to the adaptation strategy and raise the awareness is to discuss the priorities, challenges and solutions outlined or underpinning the new strategy. So how we will work, I will introduce the panelists. We have 6 highly distinguished panelists today with us. And first I will ask them to offer an initial statement related to their areas of work, their priorities and their experience. Then, if we will still have time, we will go into the second round when I will ask the panelists to elaborate more on some aspect they mentioned or reflect on what the other panelists said. Afterwards, we will take the question from you, from the audience. And now let me introduce our distinguished panelists, and I kindly invite them to switch on the video camera for the introduction. First, Thomas Kurz is Policy Officer at the European Commission, Directorate General Research and Innovation, and from the unit Climate and Planetary Boundaries. Anne Ranul is a researcher and economist, founder and CEO of Reverse Resources and member of the Mission Board on Climate Adaptation and Societal Transformation. Kevin O'Connor is Director of BioOrbic Bioeconomy Research Centre at the University College Dublin and also a member of the Mission Board. Asun Sanclair is Senior Advisor at the Barcelona Supercomputing Centre and a member of the Mission Board. Jesus Sabadi is Socioeconomic Analyst from European Commission, DG Environment, Sustainable Development Goal, Green Finance and Economic Analysis Unit. And last but not least, Livius Tirbat is Deputy Head of Adaptation Unit at the European Commission, the Directorate General Climate Action. So without further delay, I would invite Thomas to give his introductory talk and introduce the mission on climate adaptation and societal transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaroslav, for your kind introduction and to give me the floor. I will now share my screen with a few slides I have on this issue. Voila. So I'm wanting to give a quick overview about the mission Climate Resilience. The concept of the missions was introduced the first time in this new Horizon Europe framework program. The idea is really that these missions intend to achieve very ambitious and inspirational goals related to societal challenges, and that they have a clear direction, that they are targeted, measurable and time-bound, with impact for society and policymaking. So they really focus on having impact on the ground. And another very important dimension is that they engage citizens and stakeholders in co-creation, the co-implementation and the co-assessment of the missions as they go along. All missions are set to 2030, so a decade now we are in. And the following mission areas have been sort of outlined by first the member states, and now with the 5 different members of mission boards, they have been further elaborated and scoped, and we are now in the phase of designing the implementation plans, which will be scrutinized by summer, and then we will get a go-ahead, hopefully, to implementation. The 5 missions areas are soil and health, cancer, healthy oceans, seas and coastal and inland waters, climate neutral and smart cities, and an area on adaptation to climate change, including societal transformation. So that was the basic sort of area of the missions. And from that, we have developed I'm saying we because we have worked very closely and very collaboratively together with this mission board, of which we have 4 members here, including Jaroslav. So the scoping report has been presented by end of September last year, and the title, or is the Climate Resilient Europe. There's this long-term vision of the strategy of the adaptation to climate change, where which says that in 2050 the European Union will be a climate resilient society. Now, the vision of the mission of climate resilience is that by 2030 we have accelerated the smart and systemic transformations to just climate resilience. So they're really very closely linked, and the mission is really understood as to underpin the implementation of the strategy. One of the important questions we often get is, so what does climate resilience mean? And so here we unpack, in the context of the mission, we have decided to unpack climate resilience in the following areas of innovation and transformation. Very important is that the mission takes a very systemic approach, aiming for climate resilience in systems providing basic needs, including the community and social infrastructure, human health and well-being, nature and ecosystem services, water management, land use and sustainable food systems, data, knowledge and digital services, and the whole sort of scientific and knowledge system, inclusive and deliberative governance, so political systems, education and communication, sustainable and circular economies, and funds and resources, including the issue of, for example, protection gap. The objectives of the mission, as described in the scoping report, is really sort of the idea of having a place-based and inclusive approach, supporting regions in their transformation. So we want to not only have that systemic approach and go into the various areas, but we also are really aware of the fact that climate impacts are variant, or really, really different, depending on where you are, depending on the climate impacts, but also depending on the socioeconomic factors of how a society is or is not able to cope with various issues of adaptation. And so the three main objectives was the first and foremost at the bottom there is to prepare Europe for climate disruptions, and then take a smaller group of regions with us to further accelerate the resilient futures and to really sort of test in solutions on the ground, and then to by 2030 hopefully have a very reasonable and significant number of demonstrators at the regional level, where we have shown, or where we can show, that transformative systemic transformations in the context of climate resilience, or just climate resilience, has taken place. The idea of really going into this with the regions at the regional level and picking these regions up where they stand also has these following dimensions. That the first one, the preparing and planning for the climate resilience, is really a phase or a stage which we attempt to be open for all, that all regions that are somehow interested in engaging and further preparing and planning their adaptation strategies, etc., to prepare visions and pathways, and all that will be open to all the regions and communities in that context. We then want to go further, but into a second stage where we accelerate the transformations. And so this is the idea that we each year through the Horizon Europe calls, we open a window for each regions whenever they are ready from the beginning on, but then also throughout the Horizon Europe work program and duration, to allow regions to enter that stage where they will then, based on their vision and pathways and adaptation plans, test further solutions on the ground with us together and the supporting structures of the mission, which I'll later explain. And the third stage, then, also open from the very beginning, is then to demonstrate systemic transformation. And here, sort of the entry requirements would be obviously the ones from previous stages, to have a pathway and a vision, for transformation to have some tested or some ideas about workable solutions, but also the voluntarity and the commitment of the regions to access and use funds they are able to access, for example, the structural funds or a CAP, the Common Agricultural Policy funds, etc. And so with these trilogy of objectives, which we want to play out in parallel, depending at what progress stage various regions are, we want to take them further and to that development of these transformations to climate resilience. A last slide here on the structural elements that we are envisaging to put in place in order to support the missions. So here at the third column, you see the regional dimension, so to speak, and going through these 3 stages of preparing and planning and accelerating and demonstrating. And so the regions would be centrally and foremost supported by a central support structure that supports the regions and facilitates key processes. So it aids them in capacity building on how to run inclusive processes, of how to do a visioning and pathway finding process. And then it manages the portfolio of innovation actions, and when testing the various solutions. And then also it provides technical assistance to the regions when they want to further deploy and use other type of funds to deploy solutions that have been tested to a larger scale. So that's the central support structure. And then in addition, we have what we call at the moment communities of practice. And that's basically an idea to engage all those thematic networks or sectors and practitioners that are working in these different thematic areas and these different areas of transformation and innovation to provide data and knowledge services and other services to the regions. And then last but not least, we have a whole dimension of sharing and knowledge services way beyond the partner regions themselves, but also to provide that knowledge across Europe to everybody who needs it. So thank you very much for this hopefully still short, but hopefully still informative overview of the mission. And back to you, Jaroslav. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. That was an excellent overview. And I'd like to thank you also for the excellent work that you and the rest of the Secretariat of the Mission on Adaptation and Societal Transformation do the excellent support that you provide. Well, thank you so much.
Pleasure.
May I now invite Anne to take the floor and perhaps offer some of her views on what the new mission is about or should focus on from her experience as an entrepreneur in circular economy. Anne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jaroslav, and thanks for Thomas for their good introduction and overview of what the work has been about. Just to give you about a bit of context where I come from and where my thought process goes. I'm a CEO and founder of a digital startup from Estonia, and we have been quite exceptional, in that sense that as a startup we have been working as a mission-led organization ourselves, and looking how we can use the methods and tools of a startup life into applying them to solve complex global problems. So Rivers Resources is working in that space of textile circulation, and we work closely together with large global fashion brands with the mission to help the industry to set up circular economy on large scale. And our mission is to reduce the use of virgin materials used by fashion industry while replacing the materials with recycled ones. This is kind of gives me the angle to looking at this mission very much from an entrepreneurial viewpoint. And what I have been seeing over the last 7 years working in that space, I've been understanding how complicated and difficult it is to work with systems change, not like whoever you are, because we are so used to thinking in silos and working in the barriers of individual organizations, and we are so much used to thinking in linear systems where we have these building blocks and that I'm passing something over and then my responsibility is done, instead of looking at the systems we are. And I've been fascinated to see how this process around setting up this mission, understanding how to steer this, and how this work has been it's been difficult and meaningful, but it's been also really exciting. And for me, what is most interesting in this is, as Thomas also mentioned, we're talking about basic systems. We're talking about how to offer the infrastructures, the things we need for our everyday life, and keep on offering that to the global population while reconstructing it in such a way that, yes, we are resilient to climate change, but through resilience also work with mitigation still. It's not that the mission looks only at that adaptation as like a last resort, but the mission is supposed to look at the also how we are still connecting it back to the mitigation. How are we informing the communities from that adaptation side also back to the mitigation? So and this is this kind of systemic way of thinking in that layer and in many layers is a challenge that I'm kind of excited to see that this discussion is happening now on the European level, because we're talking about a lot of disruptive innovation that needs to happen, and also incremental innovation. It's easy to support incremental innovation, but it's much more challenging to support disruptive innovation, even especially if we think that the policy itself also has to become resilient. The structures that we have to become resilient to change, and so on. So Jaroslav was asking what are the priorities. For me, the priorities of this mission is how can we make these basic systems become resilient? How can we make things work in different way? It may not even be like, from my work, I see that very often this innovation doesn't mean that we have to develop technologies or new, very advanced solutions. Very often in that context of climate adaptation and resilience, we need to actually just reconstruct the existing things and put the pieces together in a different way. And it may need hands-on change of processes, not so much technologies even. Coming back to the priorities, I think it's about it's about how to measure the actual meaningful change, how to be flexible in what we are measuring, how to communicate back that yes, we're walking towards that mission achieved, and how to identify what really matters and how can we really make that change work. So this is what this mission means for me. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anne. It was really nice. So we had the priorities, communicate and make resilient. And this is the mission is especially about building the bottom-up resilience across the different systems. Thank you very much, Anne. I would like to remind the audience that you might post a question anytime using the question and answer facility, and I see some questions are coming. We will take them after the round of short introduction from all panelists. Thank you. Now, may I give the floor to Kevin, the Director of Bioorbital Research Center, and also member of the mission board. So Kevin, what are your views on the mission? What are your priorities, and where do you see this mission can make a difference? The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Jaroslav, and good afternoon, everybody. I want to put my comments in the context of, I suppose, my own experience. I have had the privilege of working on the partnership between the European Commission and the bio-based industries, referred to as the Bio-Based Industries Joint Undertaking. I'm a member of the scientific committee that advises that joint undertaking. And I think there are some interesting parallels between the evolution of that BBIJU, of that partnership, and the Climate Adaptation Strategy and where we need to go. So one of the biggest challenges for the bioeconomy, which is a huge area, is that there is massive fragmentation. So there's all these silos, and collaboration between actors is and was very difficult. But I think the BBIJU brought a structuring effect to the partnership. It brought a structuring effect in Europe to this sector. And I think if you look at climate adaptation, we need greater cooperation, we need greater collaboration between actors, and we need to empower those actors. So, and I think the BBIJU accomplished that with respect to the industry, and I'll talk later about other actors as well. But what happens, or what I've observed, is that that accelerates change. When you create the environment where people can collaborate and people are encouraged to collaborate, then you can accelerate the change, and you can also deliver higher impact because there is lots of discussion, there's lots of toing and froing, thinking about where we're going, how we're going to get there. And I think the more diverse the opinions, I think you deliver greater impact, more robust impact. So if I look at the BBIJU, and I also look at where we're going with climate adaptation, I think initially you can be quite narrow in your focus. So the BBIJU was very much about industry. It was about large scale projects. This was where the drive was. Of course, you had collaboration with scientists, but one of the things it did was it brought more fundamental science into a partnership that was initially viewed as being very industry focused. But industry and the Commission recognized quite early on in this partnership that without the fundamental science, without the basic understanding, some of the technologies were not going to succeed. So fundamental science played a critical role, and I think it plays a critical role here in the partnership as well. So one of my priorities is to see greater collaboration, but really diverse, inclusive collaboration. And one of the things that's really critical are the social sciences. So they have a different way of thinking to technical scientists. They bring a completely different perspective. So they actually bring a new way of thinking, and that's really important when we start to address something as grand as climate. And so you could see that the original products in the bio-based industry, they were thinking about biodegradable plastics, how are we going to make these bio-based plastics. What came out very quickly was that this was too narrow. And so you start to see other areas like the marine and food and enzymes and natural resources that could be sustainably captured. So sustainability became more and more important. Life cycle, which was originally, you know, it was a nice thing to have, became central to what projects needed to achieve. So in actual fact now, the Circular Bio-Based Europe is one of the partnerships that was announced during the week. And so the evolution of this grand challenge of switching away from fossil to bio-based has now become circular, because in its original guise, it was actually a linear replacement of the fossil industry. And now it's become a circular bioeconomy. And also it has gone right back to farmers. So farmers are now going to have a special place. That's mariners, that's farmers, that's the primary producers in shaping how the circular bioeconomy moves forward, because this is very important for a just transition. And you see this as well with climate adaptation. How will we create a just transition? And I believe that is through partnership, that is through bottom-up initiatives and being truly inclusive. So the bottom-up mobilization is really, really difficult. Yeah, stimulating and supporting actors to work together sounds nice, but it's incredibly difficult. You need to share knowledge, you need to share skills, and in certain circumstances, infrastructure. So I really believe that twinning is very important in order to, you will have advanced regions, you will have regions that are less well prepared, and it's about how do you share that knowledge and those skills. And cooperation really helps to build a more robust path to implementation. That's cooperation from scientists, from citizens, from engineers. It's really a very broad church. And so if I use the BBIJU as an example, you see that the BBIJU plotted their path towards the market through things like, well, what fundamental research needs to be addressed? What technologies can be scaled? And where can we implement, or how do we implement those into the market? And I believe that if you look at adaptation and the adaptation strategy, we need research and planning. Thomas has shown this on some of his slides. We need to understand where are the gaps in knowledge, and there are many. How do we plan for regions? How do regions plan so that they are ready? How do they test these strategies, first on a small scale, and then how do they implement them on a larger scale? So there is a journey in which we have to travel. So I think fragmentation is a major challenge. It's a major challenge for adaptation, climate adaptation. We have to be inclusive so that we can share our knowledge, and the path implementation requires absolutely research and innovation to fill, research to inform us, and innovation so that we can really stimulate and drive change. And thanks very much for your attention. Jaroslav, back to you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I think your overview and your remark have opened the stage for Asun very nicely when you spoke about the inclusive transition, the just transition. I'd like to invite Asun to offer her view. Asun is a philosopher and sociologist working on the equitable transformation to sustainability. So Asun, what is your view on the mission and what we have heard so far, or what we have done in the mission board? The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jaroslav, and good afternoon to everybody. Of course, I'm going to be talking about the social and the human dimensions. So if you recall what Thomas said, the vision of this mission is turning the urgent challenge of adapting to climate change into an opportunity to make Europe more climate prepared, resilient, and just. And from my perspective, I believe that this is a vision that cannot be understood without the central role of societal transformation, citizen engagement. And if we are to reach it, we need to give a central place to social innovation and to the social and human dimensions of all these different elements and objectives. So if we analyze a little bit the three objectives that also you have heard from Thomas earlier. So the first objective of the mission is to prepare for climate disruptions and for resilience. And this is not going to be possible without the participation of citizens and without understanding the social and human dimensions embedded in any planning process and in any preparedness process. I think we have very clear example right now with the resilience to the COVID pandemic. Think about the fundamental role of people's behavior and also the fundamental role of collective behavior in leading towards that resilience. So the importance of a sense of community that emerges from a sense of belonging, respect and care for others and for ourselves, and even compassion, not only for our family and our friends, but also for others who are unknown, is going to be a fundamental piece for being prepared towards reaching resilience. Think also about examples very clearly that we have seen again and again in cases of disasters and emergencies. Your neighbor is the first response, right? So often lives are saved through compassion, heroism, and helping each other. And even at a more technical level, understanding the impacts and relevant climate information is not really possible without merging the knowledge of the scientists and the meteorologists together with the knowledge of the users. So all of us who have to work, who have done work on adaptation in the majority world or in what we call developing countries, we know the great and important results that emerge from, for example, participatory modeling and transdisciplinary work with clearly vulnerable people like farmers or fishermen in vulnerable areas. And in order to understand what climate risk means for them and to be prepared for the climate impacts, it's extremely important to work together and translate the climate information into credible, salient, and legitimate climate information. So that is just one bit in relationship to the first objective. The objective number 2 of the mission, which is accelerating the transition to a resilient future, obviously also requires that social and human lens, because we need a vision of the future and we need pathways to get there. And without social innovation and citizen engagement, the fear is, at least my fear will be, that the visions are not going to be representative and maybe they are going to replicate current inequalities and unfairness, as we have seen has been the case in many adaptation solutions already, and also likely to discount the concerns of those groups that are most vulnerable or those who do not have a voice or their voices are not being heard. So the social dimensions of creating those visions and those pathways are going to have to be totally transparent in order to reach towards a fair outcome. Also, in order for a vision and pathways for the future to be executable, we will need to test and experiment. And this is going to be an important part of the implementation of this mission. We need to test with communities, with different social innovation ideas, and we need to ensure that societies and communities pull in the same direction towards that long-term resilience. And this means the visions and the pathways need to be co-created with the buy-in of all those involved, with a collective vision that is not a top-down imposed neither by experts nor by politicians, because that will not work. It has to be science-based, but it cannot be imposed by the perspectives and the visions of the future of the experts. And moreover, another layer to this will be that politics and politicians who really want to do things and to mobilize us quickly, accelerating this transition, they are going to need constituencies that support those plans, because transformation processes always entail trade-offs, and decision-making is always going to be about competing priorities. We cannot do everything at the same time. So sorting through these trade-offs and these priorities is not really a scientific question, but a social and a political one. Therefore, citizen engagement, which is one of the fundamental pillars of the mission, needs to be understood as deliberative democracy, and it becomes a fundamental condition for sorting through those trade-offs that are going to be needed if we really want to accelerate the transition to a resilient future. And lastly, I want to say a few words in relation to the third objective of the mission, which is demonstrating systemic transformations to climate resilience. This is all about creating impact at scale. It's about creating cross-border value, different regions and communities learning from each other, and making sure also that this demonstration starts from learning on what is already happening. So why is the social perspective key here? I want to sort of bring in a little bit of a push, and that is the social perspective and the fairness lenses must be, I believe, our guiding road, both to select those deep demonstrators and to evaluate their success. We all like, as Anne said, disruptive innovation, but the disruption needs to reach all and those who need it, and it also at the same time needs to be fair and not cause negative disruption for some and advantages for others. So I believe that we will demonstrate success by showing how we treat those most vulnerable. This is often a ready-made sentence, but I think it works very well here. So to my mind, this mission needs to show how much better off are our most vulnerable groups, our most vulnerable communities, our most vulnerable socio-ecological systems. We will also demonstrate success when citizens have been the co-creators, the co-implementers, and the co-evaluators. And therefore, that is the reason why these two key elements in citizen engagement are fundamental pillars, because only with those two key success measures will then be able to say that we work towards a climate prepared, resilient, and just Europe. Some food for thought on my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asun. So the audience might have noticed that there is a red line in the introductory speeches, although we have not agreed on that. So we started with the overview, then we had insight from the circular economy, bioeconomy, now from more the social perspective on the social transformation, the processes. And our next speaker will bring us to the theme of nature and how to bring back nature into our cities and into our communities. So it's my pleasure to invite Jesus Sabadi from the European Commission DG Environment to share his thought on the priorities of the mission and what he and his unit are doing in order to promote the nature-based solution and ecosystem services. Jesus, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jaroslav. So first, thank you very much for the invitation to this conference. But I would like to say that after listening these comprehensive and very rich presentations before, it is very difficult to take the floor. So I want to come back maybe to the basics. So even if when we are talking here about climate adaptation, climate resilience, and many times our narrative is about climate, we know that we are confronted with 4 interrelated environmental crises that some qualified as existential. The first one is the climate crisis, of course. But this one is interrelated to the biodiversity crisis, the overexploitation of natural resources, and pollution. As I mentioned, these crises are interrelated, both in their consequences. It's obvious that climate change affects biodiversity, for example, but also as solutions. So a better or a more biodiversity will help to solve the climate crisis. And this is indeed the approach that is followed and the objectives of the European Green Deal. So the European Green Deal wants to tackle these 4 crises at the same time in a systemic and coherent manner. And the Green Deal includes a fundamental principle, which is the do not harm oath. So the idea is really that in one policy, for example, on climate, we have to avoid that to solve this problem, we are creating or worsening problems in other fields, like in biodiversity, overexploitation of natural resources, pollution. And this implies a systemic approach. I think the speeches of the colleagues until now show really and demonstrate that both the mission and the climate adaptation strategy that was published 2 days ago, Livio is going to talk about it more into detail, are really the European Green Deal in practice, I would say. Why do I say this? In the previous presentation, we had one about the circular economy, another one about the bioeconomy. Asun was focusing on the social dimension of the solution. Here what we see is really that we need this this systemic and multidisciplinary approach to address the environmental and climate problems we are confronted with. What can I say more? For us, DG Environment, this mission is really a fundamental step, because what we see is really that the objective is to tackle all these crises. So we have components on water, we have components on nature-based solutions, and this is a fundamental point. So we are really convinced that nature can give us part of the solution. Of course, let's be careful with the words I'm using. So nature-based solutions, for example, are not a panacea. We are not going to solve all our problems with nature-based solutions, but they can contribute and they can facilitate a transition that not only benefits environment, but also well-being of citizens. I'm convinced that now LiveU, presenting the climate adaptation mission, will provide plenty of arguments to show how the climate adaptation strategy and the climate resilience mission follow this systemic approach. And we are really convinced that the mission is going to provide examples. It can be a sort of lighthouse to replicate solutions in other places. So really, we see it as a key component to demonstrate that this systemic approach can be implemented in practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jesus. That was really nice and complementing the previous introductory statements. And now it's the time to invite Liviu Stirbet, the Deputy Head of Adaptation Unit at the DG Climate Action European Commission. Liviu is one of the key persons behind the adaptation strategy, and this is why we ask him to provide his initial statement at the end, listening to everybody else on this panel, the suggestion and the approaches that are advanced by the mission itself, but also by the expert behind. So Liviu, what do you think? What is your expectation on this mission and how it fits to the adaptation strategy in your view?
Many thanks, Jaro. Many thanks to the organizers for the opportunity to be here. Many thanks to the very distinguished panelists who have spoken before me. So as Jaroslav mentioned, I had also the privilege of coordinating the work on the new adaptation strategy in the Commission. And it's been really a very fascinating journey from the early steps to adoption by the College of the European Commission on Wednesday. I've also had the privilege of working on missions before, so this on missions in general, and the concept, this novel instrument that Horizon Europe has introduced, and in the adaptation team to work in particular with Thomas and many other colleagues on the mission itself, and of course to benefit from the vision of the board. In this, I guess, dual role of both mission and strategy, I think I've had a lot of cross learnings between the two concepts. They're both quite nice, they're both new, and they're both ambitious. And this has been really what it sort of bodes well for the implementation of both mission and strategy, that we take them together. The strategy, just allow me to say a couple of words about that, and then I'll come back to the ideas that were laid out by colleagues on the panel. The work on the strategy was really a sort of whole government approach compared to the one in 2013. Which was the first strategy of the Union on adaptation to climate change. This has been much more comprehensive and much more inclusive in its design and also in the outcome. We took a whole society approach to it as the end goal, and to get there we had to take a whole of government approach. So we brought in departments that have not been traditionally associated with the topic. Today, just before me, Jesus, he comes from the Environment Department of the Commission, which has been a natural ally for us, natural in many ways, ally for us in this work throughout the years since 2013. But the novel players that we've managed to engage with have been the Economic and Finance Department, have been the sort of the insurance sector, colleagues from the competition authority. So really a very, very broad spectrum of departmental and policy makers. We've very importantly drawn a lot from research, and that is why, and sort of knowledge, where the European Commission, the EU level has been very active on adaptation and research and closing knowledge gaps. So we've drawn a lot from that, and this really permeates throughout the entire strategy. And with the mission, we're going to have a lot more of that. So it's basically the first time that we mention in policy documents, we mention tipping points in the strategy, and this comes out of a lot of research that has been carried out throughout the FP7, Horizon 2020, and for sure more will come through Horizon Europe. We've benefited from a lot of the research that has gone into insurance, Oasis, and a few other very, very influential projects have helped us to substantiate our actions and the sort of vision and the strategic focus that we put in the strategy on closing the climate protection gap. We've benefited, as Jesus mentioned already, from a lot of research on nature-based solutions. And Jesus was very kind to say, sort of modest, to say that they are a contribution. They're not, of course, the answer to everything, but a novel dimension that we're bringing now with the strategy is the fact that nature-based solutions, not only are they not a sort of universal panacea, but they themselves are in danger. Above certain thresholds, they will cease to protect us from heat waves. You know, you can imagine forest and green spaces after repeated bouts of drought, and even in a sort of Mad Max Fury Road, as Executive Vice President Timmermans said in the press conference at the launch, that sort of horrible dystopian future. In Mad Max Fury Road, there are no green walls and green roofs, and there's definitely no floodplain restoration happening there. So that's also another novel dimension where we hope to bring more from the research side going forward with the strategy on modeling. And this has been a sort of also a red thread throughout this series of community workshops, really pushing forward the modeling. That's also gotten a lot of attention from the press. On this refinement of the degree to which we can picture where even our houses will be like in 10 years in terms of exposure to climate risks, but also in terms of decision support making, in terms of genetic diversity as a source of resilience going forward. And very importantly, to reach back to what Asun mentioned in her intervention, the justice aspects and the social justice. We are now for the first time talking about a just resilience, a fair and equitable benefit from the from adaptation action, rather than having just the ones who can afford it to adapt. We will seek to have this done in an equitable way, and this is really just the beginning of the conversation there. And we've only hinted at possible ways in which this could be developed, because also we're starting from a low base currently, but the strategy has this ambition to really develop and push a just resilience concept. From the mission orientation approach, so not necessarily just the mission on adaptation. You've heard a lot of from colleagues and the board members who've spent a lot of time thinking about how the particular mission on adaptation can help really bring forward and make a lot of progress on adaptation in Europe. Behind that, there's a whole mission orientation that we from the European Commission have tried to give Horizon Europe as a whole, to sort of make it purpose-driven, in addition to, of course, all the excellent blue sky research that will continue to be funded. We've really tried to make it policy relevant, and with the adaptation strategy and adaptation mission, it really reaches a sort of a level that we've very rarely had before of synchronicity between policy, research, innovation, scale up, and rollout of these solutions. So with the mission orientation approach, with the purpose-driven work that we will be doing on the knowledge base, but also on the policy side and the legislative side, we really want to make to crystallize, to make it come to life, this vision, which for some in the press they've had sort of very interesting reactions to the strategy in the past couple of days. The strategy, as some of you may know, does not impose obligations or strict targets on the member states. The reason for that, the very easy answer to this question on targets is because in parallel to the adaptation strategy, we have ongoing discussions between the European Parliament and Council on the European climate law. One of the main pillars of the European Green Deal sets into a constitutional piece of legislation the 2050 climate neutrality target, but also a 2050 ambition for resilience. And this is the goal towards which we're going with the strategy. And the climate law will be imposing these targets. The strategy and the mission are basically filling a need that comes from elsewhere, first from the climate impacts themselves, and then from legislation and from analyses and climate risk assessments that all of these communities are doing to identify their needs, and we're coming to meet that. Very briefly, I wanted to touch a bit on some of the very nice concepts and the very nice positioning from my fellow panel members. On Thomas, we heard about the mission and the way we see already. So you see that there's a lot of thinking going into this, how to make best use of this amazing and very promising tool that is the mission. And we've definitely focused on adaptation in the strategy because that is the mandate we have received. Mitigation is really permeating to a much more to a much deeper level, the whole Green Deal, but adaptation is now really receiving the attention it should have had from the beginning. It's not, as the Executive Vice President Timmermans said in the launch speech, it's not defeatist, certainly not anymore, because it's no longer a sort of a distant reality that happens in third countries somewhere in the exotic parts of the world. No, it's really hitting us home in Europe. So we have to take action now. We can no longer sort of set it aside for fear of coming off as defeatist. But really, it's about the interplay between all of these things. It's about sustainability. It's adaptation coming together with mitigation, with biodiversity, with zero pollution. And this is also very centrally placed in the strategy, the fact that all of these things have to come together, and we work with all of the other pieces of the European Green Deal, be it the renovation wave, be it the sustainable finance strategy, and so on. Then on Kevin's vision, I think was really useful for us, and it really sort of gives us a sense of where we could go with the adaptation strategy and with the adaptation mission, because it shows also that we start from a low base in the adaptation space. The bioeconomy space has gone through this transformation, through this maturity. It's come to this stage. It was a development, a process. We can of course leapfrog some of those stages, but it's very hard to do. So in adaptation and for the adaptation mission, we're going to have to establish a lot of these structures. We're going to have to establish a lot of these networks and bring people together so that we have the implementation critical mass and that we have the connections between communities. And really, this is something that we're taking very careful note of to go forward. Also in terms of the disruption potential and how we can benefit from that. Asun, I've already mentioned, it's really how we framed it as well in the European Adaptation Strategy, the fact that it's an opportunity. We've really gone far from the 2013 stage where it was really all about trying to sort of, if I can call it that, scare tactics, you know, trying to really impress and underline over and over again the impacts. The 2021 strategy is really all about the opportunities and the solutions and the fact that we can take action. It's not something that paralyzes us out of sort of fear of not being able to do something. It's also not something that paralyzes us in a sort of planning and understanding stance, but it needs to be an action stance. We have solutions, we can develop more, we have a sufficient level of understanding to act, and definitely uncertainty is not an excuse for inaction. But really, it's about opportunities and about the justice aspect and about the representation and the democratization of this. And I think it's really all very, very useful feedback. And I really look forward also to the Q&A and also to the responses from my fellow panelists, because we're really at a learning stage where we are really keen to hear as much as possible so that we can make this a reality. Many thanks. Back to you, Jaro.
Thank you very much, Liviu, for the excellent thoughts and for wrapping up also the first round of statements. But you know, congratulations for this amazing bit of work. I can't imagine how much work was needed in order to put together, align the different services of European Commission, design the vision 2050 towards the resilience, and you know, just well done, excellent job. Thank you very much. Now, if I may invite all the other panelists to switch on their cameras so that we have a nice conversation round. And you know, Liviu started already to comment on the input and the thoughts provided by other panel members. Now I would simply open the floor. If somebody of you would like to reflect on something the other panelists said, or develop further your thoughts, initial thoughts towards the direction that Liviu outlined at the end. Is somebody there who would like to reflect or refine the initial statement? If you simply raise your hand, because I don't see the, or simply, you know, make a sign. If not, then I turn to the audience, and you know, I have seen many of known faces among the participants to this session. If you would like to ask a question, please use the question and answer facility. But also, I encourage you to reflect and share your experience from the transformative processes you have already started in your region or in your communities. I know there are several people from the regional administration, from the city administration among us who might want to take the floor afterwards and share your thoughts on what is needed. So I would simply perhaps start with the first question, and that's posted by Adeline, and she attracts the attention back to the citizen engagement. And she said it's absolutely critical if the society has to implement the zero carbon solution in the future. But how do we envisage the citizen participation to be managed? Is it consultation, co-design, ground testing of innovation project, or something else? Now, Adeline, would you like to refine your question? I can unmute you if you would like to take the floor. And I am just looking for you, right? And if you would like to, you have now the permission to speak.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thanks a lot for giving me the floor. For the context, my name is Adeline Rocher, and I'm working on innovation for the European Climate Foundation. So a philanthropy organization working towards climate neutrality. Yes, my question was that I do know that the Commission is really trying to to engage more broadly than with institutions only, and it seems that citizen engagement is a very fashionable topic for the moment, and we hear about it a lot. And I know that on the citizen engagement, I can see that everybody is absolutely convinced, but sometimes it's a bit difficult to envision how in tangible terms this will happen. I know that, for instance, usually a European program, they can deliver grants, but it's big grants and it requires heavy administration. It often requires co-funding and so on. So maybe for citizen engagement, having smaller grants, like micro grants, having direct support. I know that, but then it requires a very big machinery to support a lot of small projects. So I was wondering, how do you intend on engaging directly with citizens? Do you have intermediary bodies in mind? Do you want to engage directly with citizens? Do you want to, and do you want to have maybe citizen representative joining the board? I know that there are a lot of innovative citizen projects in various EU countries. I know that the Citizen Convention in Ireland was successful. In France, it's mitigated, let's say. But I mean, there's a lot of smaller projects happening all over Europe. So how do you concretely want to engage with them? Thanks a lot.
Excellent, Adeline. Thank you very much for that question. I think there are several members of the panel that might take it, and I'll leave you. You were the first.
Thanks. One of the yeah, advantages of the setup is that Adeline asked us the question, but also gave us a lot of the answers. So I think it's really great. And as I said, we're frantically taking notes of all of these suggestions. I would say that one of the biggest tools that we have in the climate department in the Commission that we've recently launched in December last year, and it's actually in my team as well, is the European Climate Pact, which has exactly this mandate of enabling citizen participation and citizen action, but also connecting. It's not just exclusively citizens, so it's not a sort of a citizen ghetto, if you will, but it's rather linking them up, large, small organizations with individual citizens, with groupings of citizens. And it's just started off right now. It's the pledging and ambassadorship stage, but it will soon take off with the other parts of the mandate, which are really connecting and empowering. There's the possibility of micro grants, as you mentioned, but as again, Adeline, it was an excellent intervention question, because you gave the answer also to the heavy management of micro grants. So that's really something that's taking off. The mission itself is highlighted as a citizen engagement branch for adaptation in the strategy, together with the Climate Pact. And I'm sure that Jesus will love to intervene on citizen science, because that's another way in which we can really not just give grants to or have a token figurehead citizen on a board, but really to give the tools and benefit and engage in a real sense with citizens. I'm particularly struck, and this is really a small issue, because we discussed justice as well. In Europe, when we speak English in Europe and we use citizens, we bandy it around rather in a loose fashion, but it has some sort of legal implications, and we've tried to avoid using this term in the strategy itself, and we refer to residents and so on, because it really is not just about the citizens of Europe. In the US discussion on social justice for adaptation, there's a very, very strong connotation. So I'll close this to say that citizen is indeed understood in its widest meaning. So this is it for me, but I'm sure the others are very keen to. This is really one of the fundamental questions for us and for the success of both the strategy and the mission. Thanks.
Thank you, Livio. So Anne would like to answer, but Jesus, you have been volunteered by Livio. Would you like to take the floor, or we give it to Anne?
Yes, so thank you, Livio, for giving me the floor. Yes, indeed, citizen science. So when citizens organized or not in collaboration with research centers, universities, etc., is indeed one of the tools, both for citizen participation and for monitoring the change. I saw in the question and answers that there are several questions about monitoring indicators, etc. This is one of the tools. So citizens now, especially when we can be supported by these machines,
yes.
It's very easy to collect data about air quality, about the situation of our rivers, about the situation in our forest, and aggregate them to be one of the elements of monitoring. And indeed, Thomas maybe can confirm, under FP7 Horizon 2020, there have been very, very good projects on citizen science with solutions. I'm thinking on one on water that are now implemented at national level to follow up the risk of floods, etc., and is implemented at Italian level. So this is one of the instruments, not only for citizen participation, but also for monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesus. And over to you, Anne.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to comment on this, maybe less from the mission board perspective, or I can't speak on behalf of Secretariat and EU Commission, but when I look at this question of citizen engagement from the perspective of how I myself, as a startup entrepreneur, starting from scratch and trying to do something very different to how the current structures of our policy and laws and everything operate, I have been over the years feeling as if I am trying to break into a Mordor. So the citizen engagement to a point where, like, if I'm doing something that is really meaningful, Currently, it's very difficult to go to EU policymakers and say that, hey, the policy that we have now is blocking me. I can't change it. I can't do my innovation. I can't make that meaningful change if you don't change something. So for me, citizen engagement means that we create the structure that is able to listen to those who have something meaningful to say. And it doesn't have to be that I go and like, I've been over the years trying to apply for Horizon funding for 10 times. And I haven't got that because the structure doesn't support that. But I have found, luckily, support from elsewhere to be able to come to a point where we have created demonstration to show that what we wanted to do, it works. And the question is, how can EU become flexible to actually listen, to actually create that chain of custody that these really meaningful messages get where they need to get?
Thank you very much, Anne. Is there anybody else who would like to reflect on citizen engagement? If not, then I'll add. Is it? Yes. I see Thomas. Did I miss somebody? Sorry. Is it also Asun? Would you like to take it or not?
I think Asun would like, and so would Kevin and myself. But
okay, so let's start with Asun. I have missed that, Asun. I apologize. So Asun, Kevin, and then Thomas.
No, sorry. It's just I couldn't find my electronic hand, so I wasn't sure whether I needed to use the physical and so on. I wanted to simply add on to Anne's point, right, that we need citizen engagement at many different levels, right? One very clear example is citizen science. Something completely different is what Anne is presenting. And I will say we need everything else in the middle. In the mission, what I believe is a good thing is that the logic of citizen engagement is embedded in the text and in the scope and in the way in which it is designed. And now it has to find, and it is already because I've seen drafts, it needs to find its way in a very clear way in the actual implementation. So again, I wanted to say that when we think about citizen engagement, you need to think about many different layers, from the actual citizens' voices having a way to be expressed and heard, which are two different things, to being actually hands-on partners in the actual projects that will constitute the different elements and objectives of the mission. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Asun. Kevin, over to you.
Sure, thanks. I just wanted to address the question of, I suppose I'm building on what Asun has just said, what Anne said. So, you know, the Citizens' Assembly worked quite well in Ireland, and it was a way in which people could really come from very different points of view, and it had strong support. I think it captured the imagination of Irish people, so I think it worked very well. But I think it's just one of many different pillars that you have to have. And I suppose I see innovation, either that's social innovation or other innovations, as being key to exciting people, to actually people feeling that they have ownership and that they're empowered. So maybe, Anne, that's your point. Yeah, you don't feel empowered to make change because the system isn't allowing that. So I'm really a fan of ground up, bottom up, but on the ground activity. It's not about saying to a citizen, hey, we have this great idea. Do you think it's good? Can we trial it? It's really, what are your ideas? What are you as a community? What do you want to do? But it's also then about collaborating with scientists, social scientists, engineers. It's such a variety of people that need to come together. And so for me, again, the way to do that is to create competitions in the regions, get people excited about how they can make a change. I'm not saying I have the answer on how you do that, but I do think you need to create excitement on the ground and people feeling I am in control of my future, or at least I can contribute to the future. I think there is a lot of climate depression because people feel it's too big for them, yeah, that they don't have the answers to these huge problems. And someone said earlier, you have to break it down into bite-sized bits. I'm not sure who said that, but that's really important, and so that people can get a grasp of things. So to me, in a roundabout way, what I'm saying is it's very complex, but you have to empower people.
Excellent. Thank you, Kevin. Over to you, Thomas.
Yes, thank you. I mean, wonderful things have been said before, and I think maybe I can give it a try to put it together from the perspective of the mission, specifically in terms of implementation and the citizen engagement. So first of all, yes, we want this. This is really in the DNA code of the mission concept, but also of what we now are drafting up as the implementation plan. And it really has, as said before, it has so many different dimensions and you know, aspects to how we want to do this. Just to, you know, a few examples, and none of this is yet closed, right? So we are very eagerly listening to you and taking up good new ideas. But so what we have toyed with at the moment is, for example, I mean, first of all, through the mission, I think what we want to achieve is really citizen engagement on the ground in place-based aspects. So on our main units of implementation, which is the regions and their communities. And so one of the key ideas is that we are from, you know, this is more or less a 10-year endeavor with each of the regions. And so from the beginning on, from the co-creation on of each region's vision or pathways to transformation to climate resilience, we want to engage citizens in this development. And one of the ideas is to do that through a citizen assembly or equivalent, some form of, you know, a body that brings the citizens to the table throughout the 10 years of development from this transitionary or transformative process. So in the beginning, they will be part of sort of co-creating that vision and co-creating the different pathways. Then they will move into the, again, with every other decision makers as well, they will be carried through these assemblies or other structures in the co-implementation phase. They will see and test, you know, will be part of this testing of solutions. They will take, you know, see what is happening and what works and what doesn't, and eventually revise plans. And they will also be part of that upscaling part. So on the one, that's one dimension. So the citizen assembly type of activity of really having them part of that decision-making and planning processes and assessment. The other dimension is what also Asun and Jesus mentioned, is make them part of the co-development of solutions. So, you know, citizen science, action research, you know, really, you know, sort of have that being co-developed, and say that they're not only sitting there and taking decisions, but they are actually part of the labs. You know, they take part in designing solutions, or are given grants to do that themselves. And the third dimension is capacity building, and so that was what we had said as well, is like really build capacity to empower and to capacitate citizens to actually do all this in a meaningful way. And so these are three dimensions, but there's so many more as we have said, and so please, if you have further suggestions of what has worked on the ground, please let them know to us, and we will be eager and happy to sort of really see how we can bring this on the board and on the implementation plan. Maybe one last thing to be said there. We have, you know, I introduced in the beginning these 10 areas of innovation and transformation, and we have deliberately put deliberative and inclusive governance systems as an area not only for how we want to implement it, but also as an area of where we want to do further innovation, research and understanding, and do that and transform that itself. So all this, what I just said, we want to implement this through citizen assembly. This itself will be a subject to study in the mission, to study how that actually works or doesn't work, to improve it, right? So there's that double dimension of how we want to improve that itself, because obviously we are at the beginning of these kind of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thomas. And Adeline, as you can see, I mean, you have touched upon one of the fundamental elements of the mission. So this is, I hope the answers from our panelists have satisfied you. And let me move to second question, and this is from Anne van den Berg, and it's basically meant for us soon, but I would like to extend it to everybody else on the panel if you would like to say something on it. And the question is, what would be a good way to measure the extent to which the most vulnerable communities are better off? So there are two aspects. One is the vulnerable community and communities, how we care for them, and second, how we measure improvement of their living conditions. But Anne, would you like to say a few more words about your question? And if so, then I will try to, okay, you can speak now if you would like to.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, my name is Hanna van den Berg. I'm urban adaptation expert with the European Environment Agency, working on just transition and just resilience. Yeah, I think what my question really is about how we can measure the progress on just resilience, just climate resilience. Of course, indicators for measuring progress are, they have their challenges in themselves, but I think especially when it comes to something which is quite intangible, when it is about reducing social vulnerability and improving the kind of the equity of adaptation outcomes. I would love to hear your thoughts on how we can actually measure this progress so that we know that we're on the right track and that we are in fact doing better in leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you. So now I'm looking at the hands, or, you know, simply make me a sign. Okay, Asun is first and then leave you second.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah, and probably you, I mean, you know more than I do about this, but I think my key point is, first and foremost, I think that we need to recognize that this is actually a common research topic in some areas already, and that advances have been made, right? If you look at the literature on critical poverty studies or vulnerability and so on, topics related to international development, where these issues are a fundamental piece. I think in the context of adaptation, what we need is to establish good baselines. So the first thing is that we need to make sure, that was the point of my comment, we need to make sure that the vulnerable are a particular object of the actual study or process, but at the same time is also a partner of it, right? So it's not only a matter of measuring as a subject of the study, but also how can we bring, once they are identified, these vulnerable communities, vulnerable groups, along with the process of the mission to be part of the mission, along the same ways we were discussing for citizen engagement. How can they be helping the mission identify the problems, frame the problems, and also frame the solutions? I will say that, yes, we need good indicators and good baselines, but we also need ways to ensure those vulnerable groups are tagging along and partners of the mission.
Thank you very much, Asun. Then over to you, Livio, and afterwards, Jesus.
Many thanks, thanks Jaro, and thanks Hanne for the question. In terms of, I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about this, and you will see that in the strategy, in the strategy itself, we don't give out these ultimate answer about measuring stick and yardsticks for this. I know that there's certainly many more, much better prepared people in the audience to reply this, and Asun already pointed to literature, which I'm not able to do from my policymaking sort of box. But we have really grappled with this, and I know I'm sort of also aware of ongoing discussions also at much higher levels, so at the UN level for the global goal on adaptation, so Article 7 of the Paris Agreement. There's a lot of ongoing discussions about how to measure these things and how to track and how to make sure that we leave no one behind on adaptation. Of course, on mitigation, that's a whole different thing. But I think even there, we're a bit more advanced with just transition concept. We have a fund at EU level, the Just Transition Fund, which caters to the vulnerabilities created by the green transition. And I think in the future, we will probably be in a position to have a need for that as well. That's the same kind of structure and the same kind of thinking. But on adaptation, just to say my knowledge of it is that we need, and this is reflected in the strategy, we need much more research and much more progress on this. And the mission itself can be a way to pilot these things and to try out new things like self-declared satisfaction before and after an intervention from the mission in a particular community. There's many ways, but I think the mission is itself a great opportunity to pilot things and to try out things which can then be scaled up. And this is really the ethos of the mission, and not just on the technologies or on the solutions themselves, but also in the way that they are perceived and in the way that they succeed. So thanks for bringing yet another very important topic on the table, and I think all the panelists will want to intervene on it. Thanks.
Thank you, Liviu. And over to you, Jesus.
Yes, in fact, Liviu has already anticipated what I wanted to say as a conclusion. The question is very, very difficult because we are talking here about adaptation or resilience, which are concepts that are very difficult to measure. So when we talk about climate mitigation, it's much easier, of course, not easier technically, but there are measurements. We can measure the emissions, those that we reduce. We can measure what are the impacts of these emissions, etc. So there is already a set of tools and models, etc., to measure. On adaptation, it's much more difficult to measure what is a successful adaptation policy or what is the impact of a certain adaptation policy. In the discussions we had for the mission, I remember a colleague who said, in reality, adaptation works well when nothing happens. So how do you measure something like this? So the tricky part of the question is that one is already how to measure adaptation. And then my conclusion is the same as Liviu said. For me, really the mission itself, so the demonstrators that are going to be launched, is an instrument to find monitoring and measurement tools also about vulnerable people and how the policy can benefit the population and in particular the vulnerable people. Thanks. I think Jaroslav is blocked now.
It seems Jaroslav is gone. Thank you.
I'm back. Thank you.
Maybe I just
yes, and please go on, please.
Just take over the discussion, and I just remembered when we had this discussion also in the mission board, where we were talking that or discussing that it's that so many things are already happening. As soon as we fix one measurable, we are kind of killing majority of the innovation that doesn't fall under that measurable. So it's actually part of the resilience and flexibility is to be resilient and flexible around measurements changing and using many different measurables to explain how we are making progress. Every different project and every different achievement can be explained through a completely different set of measurables. So this is really how to build a better language around these measurables is something that we should look at as part of this mission.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. Han, I hope we have answered your question. If you would like to comment on the answer received, please take the floor.
Well, I think this was great. I really appreciate your comments to my question. I would love to see how the mission develops, and I think this is really a kind of a topic of ongoing kind of discussion and debate. And I look forward to learning more about this.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Now, the next question is more a comment, and I sense a little bit also some frustrating experience. Now, I'm not sure whether Bartolains is still online and would like to explain. If so, then you can take the floor.
Yes, you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So, Christophe Bartolains, I'm located in northern France, cross-border territory near to Belgium and northern France. I worked now for 20 years in territorial development on different scales of territories. The last intervention was in the Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Greater Lille region, so 3 million inhabitants territory. My experience, we have led a transition roadmap in 2012-2013 on the regional scale, what is called the Third Industrial Revolution in Northern France. I have lived and tried to implement on this territory, multi-million territory, this roadmap by involving the public authorities, involving projects with enterprises in ecosystem. What I see today is that the progress in 10 years is very low achievement, and that the will in those 10 years of empowerment in the local context is much greater, is an explosion of initiatives now, but with very, very low support. I can have my own example. I started within Lille World Design Capital 2020, the co-design of a process to eco-renovate the schools. About 2/3 of the schools here in this territory needs retrofitting process, renovation. We selected this considering the schools are everywhere, in every neighborhood, in every village, and to build a change with the community involving 3 generations. Since we started this initiative, it is very difficult to get institutional support. We have a true engagement of projects. We are now on 6 different regions in Europe. But I'm not so in confidence that on regional scale, where we have since 2 years no any response, you will have a real movement. So my question is how Climate Adapt, that is focusing on the region, can truly build support to the initiative. You will have everywhere peer-to-peer in Europe, but are building the change. My experience is a testimony of what is the context in the different territories. And I think it is an important point to consider how not only to focus on institutional support, but really on the initiatives on the territories where the change is building.
Thank you very much, Christoph. I'm just looking at the panelists who would like to take the floor and question. Yes, Kevin, please.
And so I agree. I think it's a huge challenge to get regions to mobilize. But one of the ideas, as what we have been discussing at the mission board, is to say, okay, how do you mobilize people and then drive them forward so that the regions do something? Yeah, so you have to have a structure in place where the regions are, I have to be careful here, I don't want to say instructed, but stimulated to support the bottom up activity. So if the commission and the mission is saying, we want your ideas, we want to mobilize you, we want to see cooperation, and as Thomas has said, it's moving regions on a journey. Yeah, if you mobilize the people and empower them, I think the regions will act on that. Yeah, I think it's one strategy. Maybe it won't work, but I think you need to mobilize people.
Excellent, thank you. Would somebody, yes, Thomas, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much, Christoph, for that very useful experience sharing. And just in adding up to or complementing what Kevin just said, indeed, the mission has this idea to sort of make this kind of sort of engagement on citizen and this the support to the bottom up of initiatives already existing through small scales, etc. Make that happening through the instrument of the Horizon Europe, and make it to some extent a precondition to when they apply for these sort of calls to become a partner region, to make it a sort of a precondition that there exists, or that they commit to sort of establish structures that do that and help and promote that. So it is really, you know, to the extent possible within our instruments we have at our hands, of course, which are not obligations, etc., but it's more like the carrots. We would like to really sort of promote that a lot. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. At this stage, I would move to the next question, and I would like to combine two questions. One from Erika, who asked how to measure when a system is being transformed, and a question by Sabine, which explained the transformation go hand in hand with the deep learning. But before turning to our panelist, Erika, would you like to better express your question, or you have now the possibility to talk? And afterward, I give the floor to Sabine.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for the panelists. Yeah, actually, I'm working in a project in Germany, also focused in this transformation process. Specifically, my task is to develop a concept to monitoring and assess the transformation process in a project, which is a it's a project in a structural project for enhancing biodiversity in agricultural landscape. So we have also the landscape structure. We are working with these living labs. But my problem or my question in general is, I think that it's quite difficult to find practical solutions, practical tools for make this assessment of the process per se. So my question was oriented at, now if you look into the history, it's easy to see the transformation process and you have so many examples, but how do you measure the process in the moment when you are in a project who is working on? So if you have some, maybe some ideas, also recommendation or experience that we can incorporate in this process. And the question is also oriented to, how do you know that you already reached a transformation? How do you see that if you project or if the system was transformed? So I don't know if it's clear.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I would like to take also the question from Sabine. Sabine, if you would like to speak, you can do it now.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so I must confess, I've just moved back to the European Union and I've lived and worked for a very long time in Southern Africa. And transformation, obviously, there is a bit of a, a different kettle of fish. However, there are, from an academic research perspective, obviously some very very key ingredients, so to speak. And I think it links very much to what my pre-speaker said about, we've been debating that a lot, when is what transformed, which part of the system, because obviously you're transforming always bits and pieces, it's not the whole system. What are you looking at? And we've linked it very much to the idea of deep learning, and obviously that comes with agency and the empowerment of people, a very big topic in Africa. And but it's about this learning, because it's obviously a learning which goes much deeper. So it's this idea of triple loop learning that Paul Vostell coined quite many years back. And how do you, and what we see, that it's quite important to document this type of learning and to also share it. That in itself becomes a tool to empower, and also a tool to unlock certain structures or barriers that exist. So I was just wondering, and part of that learning, obviously not only the good stuff that brings success, but also those things that might fail or don't work, or maybe they just don't work because there's a specific context. So this might again be some structural issues, might be illegal issues, might be cultural issues, obviously. But how to document that, to share it, and to partially with that also ensure that certain transformative processes in a certain context become more successful or more deeper entrenched, or might even be accelerated in certain cases. Sorry, that was a bit...
No, that was excellent. Thank you, Sabine. I think this is an easy question and everybody would like to answer. So just to summarize, Erika asked, how do we know that we transform? How do we measure? And how do we certify the success? and Sabina asked, how do we document, evaluate, and pass over the learning and experience? So who would like to take the floor? Yes, Asun, please.
Yes, thank you, Jaroslav, and thank you, Erika and Sabina. Those are very easy questions. No. In listening to you, I was reminded, so when we started thinking about the topic of transformation I'm talking about the IPCC Fifth Assessment Report back in 2013, 2014, some colleagues eventually mature a way to think about that. It's called the 3 spheres of transformation. I don't know whether you have heard about that. It's the work of Karen O'Brien. And what is useful about that is that it gets you a little bit beyond the thinking of metrics and the more thinking about what are the types of things that we talk about when we talk about transformation. And they divide it between the practical, which is the behaviors and the technical responses, the political, which is the sort of middle layer in the circle, and then the personal on the outside, which is about values, beliefs, worldviews, and paradigms. So maybe this is just one way to structure this thinking. I think we need to be much more creative on all these issues. And also, I believe that measuring transformation is not an end state; it's a process. So it happens a little bit. It's the same problem that Anne was saying earlier in relation to vulnerability, right? That you cannot say, okay, now I'm done. This is measured. This is the result. So we need to be, I think, a little bit more creative. But I will refer you to this work. If you Google the 3 spheres of transformation, because at least it opens the box in a particular set of directions.
Excellent. Thank you. Somebody else would like to take this question. Yes, Anne, please.
I'm again kind of thinking in parallel to my own experience. So I have kind of been in this situation for a long time where we are in that transition of knowing when we say that the mission is this is where we want to go, and we know that if we achieve to a point where we can say that yes, we are creating impact, and then we can show how we are transforming this system, then we have one measurable that we have in mind, that this is what we are going to measure. But in that early stages where we don't yet have the participants coming along, and we yet have so many roadblocks that we cannot do anything about actually, then we have been kind of breaking down the measurables to the roadmap that in the very beginning we are measuring one thing, in the second stage we are measuring completely different thing, and through these different measurables we can still say that we can show the roadmap, we can show that we are moving closer to what we actually want to achieve. And maybe that's one thing that needs to be done, that is like it can't be one measurable. Yeah, and about the deep learning, I'm kind of really fascinated because I haven't really, I'm not so common with that terminology and the what is written about that. So I am intrigued to understand what it really means, or what is the science, what does the science say about that? Because from my own experience, I have seen that this deep learning means the very fundamental understanding of these processes and this change, where you have so many different stakeholders who all together need to be moved, and you need to start kind of bringing them on that path one by one and create that movement all together. But for depending on who you are talking to, the language needs to be different, the way how you take them on the journey needs to be different, and that's that I don't know if that's what you meant there actually. So I'm actually keen to know more about what you meant with the question.
Excellent, thank you very much. I would suggest that we move to other question. Sabina, Erika, thank you very much. Those were very pertinent and very question that would really need several hours of discussion.
And
so would you?
I have still my microphone. Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to reply for something. The problem is actually what happened when you are working in a project that you have to present the results to the European Commission or to the financial institution, and you cannot say, yeah, we are making progress in the people thinking, because you have to show this data. You know, my point of my quick question is going, how do you work in this context when you have a structured project, when you have a financial institution to present this progress of this transformation process or the project that you want to make something new, but you cannot say, yeah, we are changing people's mind. You know, this is more or less my direction in this case. How do you can really find the balance between this bottom up and up and down, bottom up approaches? I'm sorry for reply to the question.
Thank you. No, I fully understand this challenge. You know, I think throughout this session we have suggested several times that the easiest way is to say from the upfront, how do you want to measure the progress that you are making? So rather than, you know, starting the journey and looking for the direction from the beginning to specify a set of measurables in addition to the deliverables. Measurables, how do you measure the progress on the pathway that you have chosen? So I would, in my view, those measurables can be changed as you learn more about the type of transformation that you are facing. But it's always a good idea to start with a clear idea. How do you want to measure the progress before you embark on the journey? And Thomas, for final answer.
Yeah, I mean, very quick, and I mean, and to some extent abstract, but I think what you're talking about to some extent, and also your response to this, Jaroslav, was a little bit, you know, you may want to look at this theory of change concept and to think about, so, okay, you know, since we don't know exactly what will at the end trigger a transformation or not, you know, what are the underlying assumptions that you think need to be in place, or you and, you know, it's a participatory process, actually, the theory of change, that you and your actors are thinking what needs to happen in order to trigger this, and then turn that into little, you know, sort of more measurable entities. So, you know, if everybody thinks, you know, we all need to have a different set of value when it comes to diets, for example, you know, in order to, you know, to tackle sort of climate change or something. What does it take to make a diet change and, you know, sort of to change the people in their mind? And then you break that down into things that are more measurable. So this goes, I mean, there's quite a large number of research and a guidance on theory of change, and that should help you in this, I think, quite a bit. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. With your permission, I would go over to the next question, and that's by Bruce. And Bruce is asking whether the panelists and the mission board members could comment on the shift from being research mission on adaptation to a current focus on climate resilience, and what is the expected role of research and researchers. But as before, I would like to give the opportunity to Bruce to refine if he's still with us. I'm just looking for him. I cannot see him on the list, so probably he might already left, right? That might be the case. No, here it is, right? Bruce, you might complement your question if you wish so. You need to unmute your microphone, right?
Great. No, I think you've captured it well. Just to say that I'm from Canada's International Development Research Centre and have been co-designing a substantial research program on climate adaptation and resilience for looking at our cooperation with developing countries. So very interested in the evolution of the mission and your own learning of this perhaps shift of what is adaptation, what is resilience, and why are you using one word versus the other?
Another easy question I think everybody would like to take on. So who would like to start? I don't see hands up.
Liviu's hand is up.
Liviu, okay. Liviu, up to you. Over to you.
Thanks, thanks Jaro, and thanks Bruce for the question. Just as a side note, I spoke to the Canadian Assembly, I think, that is just now starting work on the Canadian adaptation strategy, the sort of federal level, 2 weeks ago, and it was really a very interesting discussion, and we exchanged a lot on the concept of just resilience and the peculiarities of the Canadian federal model and its sort of relevance for the EU sort of federal level and vice versa. So it was really, really interesting. And I think we have a lot to learn from each other from the Canadian model. In the sort of more specific questions that you had about adaptation and resilience and the interchangeably way the way that we use them interchangeably, we've had a lot of discussions also with our political level about this, and it's been a sort of very educational experience for our senior management and also the commissioners in the college when we have to discuss with them. The way we sort of broke it down for them simply, because we do not have the luxury of lengthy discussions and bibliographies and citation indexes and so on, was that adaptation is sort of the process of becoming resilient. The discussion in the board, I will leave that for the board members to sort of develop, but it's been really also a very interesting way of positioning it in communication terms, whether it's about adaptation, the process, or whether it's about resilience, the goal, and also whether adaptation somehow seems defeatist. What we have argued, and I think we've really carried through this message, is that it's no longer the case. We can no longer hide because defeatist sort of not admitting that adaptation is necessary. It doesn't square anymore with the realities of climate, including in Europe, and I understand also including in Canada. And just as one last remark about this and adaptation versus resilience and how we communicate, as a sort of small side comment, we were arguing whether adopting a climate change strategy in February made any sense when we know, and this is also very visible in the strategy itself, that heat waves are the sort of deadliest for now form of climate change impacts, floods as well, in terms of the damage that they do in Europe. But there's no flooding and there's no heat waves in February. And then we had Texas, and all of a sudden it became clear that we're not just talking about global warming, but about the extremes and the increased lack of predictability, and then the need for, as it's called in the US, weatherization of the infrastructure. That was a big component of the strategy. So all of a sudden it made perfect sense, and we had the unfortunate for the people of Texas, but for us in terms of communication, carrying over the message, it was very good timing in the end. So we had discussed this about with your Canadian peers at this meeting 2 weeks ago, that we had started the meeting basically. The Canadians from the different provinces were telling us the temperatures in each of the parts of Canada, and it was really some sort of scary figures of -40 in Saskatoon, I think, and so on. But it's really not just about heat waves. It's about the whole climate change perspective becoming extreme and unpredictable. Thanks.
Thank you, Livio, for that. Somebody else would like to take part of the question on? Somebody else afterwards? On over to you.
I wanted to kind of reflect back on the question from a discussion we had with mission board. I think it was actually the very first meeting that we had, when we were like, I personally came to the meeting with a bit of a shock that, are we really talking about adaptation, not mitigation anymore? Like, why? And I think somebody here also mentioned before that it's been in developing countries an old story already. Like I was talking to a researcher in Bangladesh who was saying that we are experts on that adaptation already because this is our daily life. And this is something that we need to work with. But for me personally, what made the shift to understand why we need to talk about adaptation very strongly in parallel with mitigation is the logic of the insurance, that you can't explain to people what the risk is, and you can't make them think how to avoid that risk if you don't talk about the worst case scenarios. So it's really about understanding what is the worst that can happen. What would we do then? And then coming back to the mitigation from there, how can we avoid that worst case scenario? So that's kind of how, for me, it fell into place why adaptation is really important.
Thank you very much. And Bruce, if I may add to that something, the original name of our mission before it was adopted was Mission on Climate Adaptation and Resilience. And afterwards, it was changed to societal transformation in order to highlight that it's not only the defensive character of adaptation, not only the negative framing, we need to respond to threats and defend ourselves, but it has a lot to do with profound changes, how we look at the society, how the society is organized, how the society is co-constructing the exposure or the risk that are amplified by the climate change. So there is no big thematic change in the original mandate. We only align under the overarching goal of resilience. As Liviu highlighted, adaptation is the way of becoming more resilient. So that was exactly the logic that we adopted in order to highlight the profound changes in the resilience as the overarching goal. There's also a research component in your question. What is the role of researchers and research? And of course, the mission is embedded within Horizon Europe, which is a research and innovation network. And the main goal of the mission, from the research point of view, is to how to identify the levers and the innovation that might unlock the potential of transformation. So the research component is absolutely of the critical importance within the whole idea behind the mission, but the mission is also about policies, also about how to make the on-ground changes and how to measure the progress. So the missions are partly rooted and come from the research innovation, but they are meant to become something like inspiring or an instrument for policy coherence across the different sectors and sectoral policies. I hope this satisfies your question, and because our time is drawing to an end,
Jaroslav, Kevin had his hand up. Oh,
yes, please, Kevin, please go on.
Sure, yeah. Just a few quick points. One is that the mission is not about research. It is about research embedded in a wider ecosystem. And you mentioned it, Jaroslav, about policy, but I also think about innovation. I think it's really important that we bring those tools in. And also just to point to Anne's point, mitigation is part of the toolbox. It's not that, as Liviu has pointed out, adaptation is not defeatist. Adaptation is something we need to address, but it's part of the toolbox. And just to say about wet weather, Liviu, the Romans refused to settle in Ireland because they called it Hibernia, which is eternal winter. And would you believe it, but we are now wetter. We are twice as wet now in Ireland as we were 100 years ago. So if you thought Ireland was wet, it's even got worse. And this is evidence of what is happening. Yeah? This is what's happening around the world. So it's not just droughts. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And now I really need to take the last question, and this is from Paul, and this is really an appealing question. And although we promised to finish on time at 4 o'clock, then I would still try to take it. And the Paul's question is a little bit lengthy, but in principle, it's does the mission go out of its way to include the input from women and youth in terms of clear and concrete programs? And Paul, if you want to add something, you might do it now.
Thank you very much. I'm Paul. I'm a senior research officer with the BCI, that is Blockchain and Climate Institute in the UK. And so mostly what we do is that we try to enhance the use of blockchain and emerging technologies in climate change action. And mostly for my part, there are a number of projects that we have, for instance, with the Africa Adaptation Initiative. And as I've said, for me, attending this webinar is more like for benchmarking, so that if there are lessons that I could learn, that I could also probably, use in the other projects that we are doing in Africa, then that would be very good. So youth are the majority of when it comes to the population. That is both in Africa and any other continent. But what I was observed is that with most climate adaptation projects, the youths have always been on the periphery, and that also includes women. Women have not been felt when it comes, especially when it comes to the platforms of policy. So I would want to know the mission. Does it have concrete programs that are very practical, that involve the input of youth and women, and especially considering that the youth, they stand to suffer the longest when it comes to the impacts of climate change. So I think they would be like, I would say, like some of the biggest stakeholders in all this. Yeah. So thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Paul, for this very important question. We have roughly 3 or 4 minutes, and I see there are several hands. Jesus, is it a current hand?
Yes, very quickly. So yes. The mission must take into account the situation of young people and women. So this is really fundamental. So first of all, young people, we know that they have been essential to put really climate and environment at the top of the agenda. So I doubt that now we would have a Green Deal without the young mobilizations. And then the consequences of climate change have a clear gender component. So this, for me, is also something crystal clear. And probably, or I'm convinced that even more in Africa, as you were mentioned. So probably Thomas can give more details about how in practice this will be structured, because the logic is more bottom up. But this is clearly a factor that has to be taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jesus. Over to you, Thomas.
Yes, thank you very much. And indeed, I mean, both the gender and the young or the next generation aspects are very important dimensions. As in terms of concrete projects, no, we don't have that yet, or as of yet, really defined very clearly. But again, I mean, these are, what we have mentioned is that both gender and the youth are very important dimensions, which we would like to make a prerequisite to be taken into context when we onboard, so to speak, these regions that want to really participate in this mission. And so, and to embed that, you know, for example, that as you have a citizen assembly or citizen engagement structures, you would have a structure within the regions to work with the next generation, the youth or others, and there would be support from the mission in terms of or capacity building or project funding or other type of sort of support to advance and further develop these aspects. And coming back to the research question as well, I mean, it's again, there's both, you know, there's sort of the support in terms of sort of innovating and finding what's the best practice at the moment, but then at the same time the mission is also about learning and studying about this transformation and how that actually, if we want to really, that's the ambition of the mission, to upscale these kind of innovations and transformation in a larger scale, to learn how that works. And one of the last points I want to make is you know, while the mission itself at the moment is focused within Europe, we really put a lot of emphasis on knowledge sharing and dissemination. So we really do hope that there will be lessons to be learned that you can also take to other contexts like in Africa, knowing that, of course, it's still a different kettle of fish, as Sabine nicely said before. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, this is all we had time for today, because there's another, the high-level panel is waiting, is using exactly the same facility. So we have to finish. Let me thank on behalf of all audience, distinguished panelists. It was excellent discussion. Thank you, you know, all the participants for taking time for discussing with us this issue. It was wonderful. Unfortunately, we cannot clap the hands right now, but I think everybody has really enjoyed that. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.